I've wanted to make this video for a while now. I have this tick that my friends and family might kind of get annoyed with me at, but it's whenever I see the price of something that I think is just too high, I'll kind of just ramble on and on like, oh, it shouldn't cost more than X amount. That's ridiculous. It's a scam, yada, yada. And they'll basically just like, shut up, Paul. It doesn't matter. And obviously people can spend their money how they want to, but it does hurt me kind of deep inside when I see people spending on something that's not, I don't really think is worth it or is not that great of value. So that kind of brings me to the title of this video and part of the reason why I started Open PPG. I think paramotors are one of those things that's a bit overpriced, and I don't want the cost to be basically the reason why, you know, my brothers or friends, family can't fly. So how can we make paramotors less expensive? There are three main things that I think can be done on the cost side of things to make it more affordable for everyone. But first, before we get into them, I wanted to put in perspective, you know, paramotors are not that expensive, you know, definitely compared to general aviation, and why so many, you know, airplane and helicopter pilots fly paramotors in their free time. The first point is that even if you had unlimited money, there's really nothing like paramotoring at all. Not even close to in general aviation. It's like you are what's actually flying. You are the landing gear. You are, you know, you can see a whole 360 view of your surroundings. You feel exactly the wind in your face. And you just really don't get anything like it in general aviation when you're flying in a plane. So I think that's kind of one of the big reasons, and it's not a cost thing at all. It's just a practicality thing. You know, paramotors fly nice and slow, and you really wouldn't want them to fly faster. You can kind of soak in the whole surroundings. It's super fun. Flying out on a smooth day is basically like, I don't know, pure joy for me. And I don't think general aviation would ever match that feeling for me, at least. You know how astronauts say when they first kind of go to space and they see the Earth, you know, in their whole field of view, it just changes the perspective like they have on the world and everything like that. I mean, I'm not an astronaut, but I think it's the same kind of perspective shift that you get, you know, flying paramotors. You can see everything. You can see your whole town, you know, see all of obviously your houses and everything. It's just kind of a little mental shift. And I just don't think you're going to get that close to the same feeling, you know, flying out of an aircraft. Just, I don't, at least. And now experience difference and how fun it is aside, you know, paramotors versus general aviation. Getting to the cost comparison of it is an area that really, I think, makes the choice for a lot of people, where it's just like a non-contest because, you know, flying an airplane or helicopter is so much more expensive that just, it doesn't matter. But I did want to go over the cost things, you know, kind of just comparing paramotors to general aviation. Number one is the purchase price. You know, obviously planes, you know, not cheap. Helicopters, not cheap. And it's partly because, you know, a ton of regulation, that kind of stuff. And it's kind of sad nowadays, like the most common airplane, you know, people fly is a design that's more than 70 years old. You know, it's from the 1950s, and it's the most common plane people are flying around. And that's before like printed circuit boards, like LEDs, lasers, zip codes, you know, were invented. So the plane designs couldn't even take any advantage from any of those technologies. And if you want to buy that plane that's same certified nowadays, it's going to cost you like $400,000. So again, purchase price super high. Paramotors tend to be, you know, 6,000 to like 10,000 in that range. So much more affordable. And even if you wanted to get like a kit plane, you're still going to be spending, you know, probably $100,000 or more. And then you're going to have to spend, you know, 1,000 to 1,000 hours building the plane. Whereas with paramotors, you're going to spend maybe an hour max putting it together. So the purchase price of a paramotor outright is around, you know, 10 times less than a plane or something like that. And maybe 20 times, you know, depending on the plane. But even like kind of the cheapest planes, it's still going to be multiples more expensive. So even after purchase price, then you're going to have insurance, and that's going to add up, you know, 5, 10K a year easily. Then there's storage. So you got to get a hangar. That's probably going to be $300 to $600 a month, depending on where you are, maybe more than that. Whereas paramotors are basically free to store. Like if you have a small amount of space, you can store it. So maybe, you know, a couple bucks comparison. So again, multiples X cheaper, 10 times cheaper. Then there's fuel cost. Paramotors use very little fuel in comparison. You know, a plane might cost about $30, $40 an hour in fuel to operate. A gas paramotor is maybe $6. And then, you know, obviously electric's going to be like 60 cents. So much cheaper just operation wise. And then you're gonna have the maintenance side of things. So plane, if you want to get an annual overhaul, you know, $1,000, $4,000 engine overhaul every few thousand hours, you know, $50,000, $30,000. With a gas paramotor, you're still going to have maintenance, you know, spark plugs, swapping out, rebuild maybe every 100, 200 hours, you know, but it costs about $300-400 to kind of do that thing. And you might have to do it yourself. You can pay someone to do it, but still much cheaper. Then you have a wing and stuff like that too. So paramotors, you're going to replace your wing maybe every few hundred hours, get an inspection on it. So let's say you replace it every 400 hours. That's probably about $10 an hour, you know, obviously. And then there's electric, you know, very little maintenance with electric, no engine rebuilds, anything like that. And then obviously with planes, maybe not so obvious for some people, but you know, planes, you got to get a license. Paramotors, you don't have to get any licensing. Still a good idea to get training. But you know, if you want to get training and get your license, fly plane or helicopter, you're going to be spending, you know, $15,000 probably on average, just to get the training done. And then you're going to have kind of constant maintenance over time. You kind of renew your license, make sure everything's good, get medical checks, stuff like that. Whereas paramotors, not needed. So when you add it all up in comparison to fly like a small plane, it's going to be 10, 20 times the cost of flying a paramotor, and probably 5 times the cost to get it going, like just to build the plane too, and you know, maintenance and licensing and stuff like that. You got to spend you know, 40 hours or whatever in a plane before you can fly by yourself. Paramotors, you're generally going to spend less time than that to get flying, and then you have obviously class time, all that stuff. So planes, you know, helicopters going to be a lot more upfront time, and then you know, 10, 20 times upfront cost. But paramotoring is still expensive. So what can be done to bring the cost down? And there are 3 main kind of cost categories in my eyes, at least. There's the frame, hoop, netting, gooseneck bar kind of system. So the whole structure of the paramotor. Then you have the power plant / motor. And finally, you have kind of this combination of small market and dealer system. So what can be done to bring these costs down, and what have we done to address these kind of cost problems in my eyes? When I first started paramotoring 8 years ago and getting into it, the first thing I noticed is like, dang, these like paramotor frames are expensive. I don't think there's any reason it should be that expensive. If you look at just buying the frame from most manufacturers, they cost anywhere between $2,000 to $3,000. So that's definitely something that had to be addressed in my eyes to get, you know, paramotors more affordable for everyone. So the first thing we did to kind of address the frame cost is we manufacture, you know, at least 100, 200 frames at a time. And that's a kind of expensive thing to do. There's a lot of automation that needs to be done, you know, robot welding, bending, that kind of thing. Whereas most manufacturers will just make a handful at a time, or make, you know, one by one. But there is a downside to kind of the mass production, and that's the upfront cost. There's going to be a lot more tooling cost, like kind of the automation process. And then obviously just like takes a lot of money upfront to do that. But we think it's worth it long term. And again, we made some kind of costly upfront expenses. Like for example, for the gas motor, we had like a custom gas tank design done and molded. So it's like the tooling for that is pretty expensive. And that's partly why you'll see a lot of manufacturers just buy off the shelf gas tanks, and people really don't make their custom, you know, gas tanks. It's just because it's really expensive. But we wanted to make sure that, you know, the quality and experience is as high as possible. So we think long term, it's going to be kind of the best bet. The next thing for the frames we did to kind of keep the cost down is we share the same frame for all of our models. We just had kind of 2 models, but a lot of manufacturers will have multiple frames for the same engines even. Whereas we basically designed the frame from the ground up to be compatible with gas, electric, and it can share all the components. We don't have a ton of models, nothing like that. We keep it simple. And the cool thing is all the groundwork is already done, and all those, again, tooling and cost have already been made. So, you know, sharing the cost between those 2 different models makes a lot of sense. So by just making one version of the frame, we can kind of make the paramotor much more cost effective. And this is partly why we can sell a gas paramotor for $2,000 less than the average gas paramotor on the market. Same thing for electric, and still keeping the same kind of high premium parts. And then the other thing we do is, I kind of like this saying that, like, you know, you can have any color as long as it's black. I think it's really, in my eyes at least, I really value, function over form or looks or kind of fashion. I think colors are cool, super fun, but I know a lot of paramotor manufacturers struggle with just keeping kind of the inventory and the different colors and stuff like that. It just definitely adds to cost. And when you're cruising around flying, just having the time of your life, I know I'm not at least ever thinking about, oh, what color is my frame or whatever. It kind of doesn't matter to me. We try to make it, look as good as by default as possible, and then not mess around with a bunch of different options. Then the other thing that it's going to affect, your cost, design, stuff like that, is the material you use. So we've used just about every type of material for frames and a design and stuff like that, titanium, aluminum, carbon fiber, plastics. So what material is the best choice for a frame to be made of? The two most common material choices for, paramotor manufacturers is either going to be aluminum or titanium. We make our frame out of aluminum. We could make it out of titanium. Titanium sounds cool. It's kind of a fun selling point. It's like, hey, my frame's made of titanium, whatever. It sounds cool. And that's kind of half the value to many people, I think. But from a physics standpoint, I don't really think it makes much sense for a paramotor frame. Let me explain. So strength of titanium, given the same mass or part size, is going to be higher. But that isn't really what we care about, especially in performance sports, aviation, stuff like that. We really care about the weight to strength. And when you really look at all the frames that are made of titanium on the market, they all use like a grade 2 titanium, which is about 30% less strength to weight, compared to 6061, like T6 aluminum, which is what our frame is made of. And for comparison, like 7075, compared to grade 2 titanium is about 65% stronger. So the aluminum is much stronger in those cases, which is why we use 7075 for our gooseneck bars and not titanium. We used to make our gooseneck bars of titanium, but aluminum is just a better choice. It's a little bit more expensive, honestly, for the bars, but I think it makes sense. Now, grade 5 titanium could be used, and that has a much higher, weight to strength ratio. But I think the reason you don't really see manufacturers use it as much is just because it's much harder to weld, much harder to bend, it's much stiffer, stuff like that, and it does cost more. So I think that's why you don't really see any manufacturers that make the frame titanium is using, the high strength titanium. And there's obviously applications for titanium, like if you're trying to make, a supersonic jet that, the SR-71 or whatever, and the skin is going to melt off if you use aluminum, then that's definitely a use case. But I don't think it really is a use case for paramotors. We're not that high temp environment. It just doesn't make sense there. The thing is, I think titanium is really more of a kind of marketing thing than anything else, but that's good because we can make our frame out of aluminum and have no strength, penalties at all. And also the cost is cheaper, which is good if you're trying to make an affordable paramotor. So the next thing that kind of works into the frame cost is replacement part cost. If you're flying paramotors for a while, you're going to bump, you're going to trip, you're going to break your frame a little bit. So cost effective, affordable replacement parts is really important. And it is something that kind of adds up over time. It's not something you're going to see initially when you first, buy your paramotor, but it is an important thing and it really does add up over time. So if the frame costs $3,000 and, the parts are going to be kind of follow suit, and if the frame costs $1,000, the parts will be that 3 times less expensive. So that kind of stuff makes a big difference. And also the other thing we do kind of related to replacement parts is for OpenPBG in the frame, all the components are fully open source, so you can download files, you can get stuff CNC'd, welded or whatever to the exact spec, and that's really good. Not for people in the US as much. I think you can obviously just buy replacement parts from OpenPBG, and that's fine. But a lot of people kind of forget about the international people where, shipping costs can really add up. It can be really expensive. And then also just quick, availability. So it's nice just to have the option, So that's why we open sourced all the files. So it's just an extra thing. You don't have to do it, obviously. But I think it's something at least I like in my eyes. And that's too, especially if you buy a paramotor and then the manufacturer went out of business. I mean, there's no plans to, but it can happen, and it does happen, where it's like if you don't have any designs or files or whatever, it can be, you're kind of out of luck. I mean, we're happy to sell replacement parts, but again, you can make them yourself or buy them elsewhere. So I think it's a really good thing. It works the cost down. So all these factors I just talked about kind of make the whole frame and, paramotor structure much more cost effective on the kind of frame side of things. And then number 2 is the motor and kind of power system. And again, paramotoring is kind of a small market. It's not really that big. And this is part of the reason why, a company like Honda hasn't come in and made paramotor engines, or even say like the Chinese have come in and like made paramotor. It's just not worth it. It's kind of too small, and just like the volumes just aren't high enough. So there's not much we can do for the kind of gas ICE motor side of things. But with our electric unit, we can definitely kind of build on the tech from the EV world and their large scale kind of production. Same thing from the drone world, where kind of mass scale, mass production is the norm. So we've designed our motor, battery, and controller all from the ground up, specifically just for paramotors in mind. This allows us to kind of focus on just putting cost into, what makes the best paramotor. And then finally, this is kind of an area we've decided to take a different approach on than other manufacturers. And it might be a little bit contentious maybe, but I think if paramotoring is to become like more and more affordable, this is definitely something that kind of has to be done. So number 3 is selling direct. So what this means is just there's no dealers between you and you buying it directly. Now there's most definitely some downsides to this, and it's partly why I think there's no paramotor manufacturer that I know of that sell solely directly. And the reason why is dealers a lot of time are trainers or instructors, and they have a really big sway on, what their students buy, what, people coming to the sport buy. And their students typically buy, what they train on or what their instructor suggests is best. And because it's such a small community, a lot of times your paramotor instructor is going to be the only person you know. He's kind of your flying buddy, and if you went around and bought something different than what he recommended, then, it might be a little bit awkward. So at the end of the day, they have a lot of sway over, what their students decide to buy. So manufacturers understand this, that, the dealers have such big influence, instructors have such big influence that, it's worth, paying them $1,000 to kind of sell, their frame or motor. But, we try to stay away from that at OpenPBG just because obviously that $1,000 isn't going towards making a better product. It's just going towards kind of advertising. So this is kind of a sensitive area for manufacturers and dealers. They could sell directly, but obviously that'd cut into their sales a lot. And they obviously kind of made that calculation that it's worth, giving the $1,000 commission to, instructors and dealers. So for us at OpenPBG, we like to sell directly, and we don't really like the idea of, extra middlemen. And we don't really like the idea that, instructors are kind of, it's hard to separate the human aspect of it. It's like, hey, if I get, $1,500 commission on this one versus, $100 commission on this frame, even if the one you only get $100 on is, a better version for your student or, a better option for them, it's hard to be like totally impartial. So, it's a free country. Obviously people can do what they want. People are allowed to, make money kind of however they want, but we kind of try to steer clear of that and sell direct as possible to kind of, eliminate that. One, it makes the end product, $1,000 cheaper, just not having a dealer system. And, the few dealers we do have, they aren't doing it for commission because they could make a lot more money selling other frames and stuff like that. So there's definitely good instructors out there that are, can kind of separate the two. But again, manufacturers understand how powerful commission is, and how much sway that an instructor or dealer has over their student's choice. The other thing is most paramotor manufacturers are not based in the US, so they really do need importers and dealers to kind of sell effectively, whereas we are based in the US. So, obviously shipping in the US, not a big deal. So we really don't need any US importers. And again, importers are just another kind of cost, they need to make money for their time. So it's another thing that kind of just adds to the cost, an extra, another middleman. So overall, selling directly is another big way to kind of decrease the cost of paramotors. We've done these things, and it's the reason why we can, sell a modern design paramotor with really the best, accessories we can find for, $2,000-$3,000 less than the average paramotor sold on the market today. We could bring the cost down further and use like, less expensive harnesses, or even maybe use the default throttle versus like the off-grid aviation throttle, which I think is the most expensive, hand throttle there is. But at the end of the day, I don't really think it's worth it. And we still really want to keep the kind of highest quality components we can. So let's actually just take a look at the cost overall real quick. Right now, you can get the S-Pen 40 ICE paramotor setup for $5,460, ready to fly. And for easy comparison, we actually break everything out, all the pricing, so you can see the cost of each component. Whereas a lot of manufacturers will bundle the price together, so it's kind of hard to see the cost you're actually paying for each component. If you want, you can see for yourself even. Just ask if they'll break down the cost. That way you can see and get an idea of, what each component really does cost. And at the end of the day, we are in a position where we can discuss stuff like pricing. As we do sell directly, we're not going to upset any of our dealers or anything like that. And like, heck, I mean, everything is already open source for all of our files. We publish them and make them open source. So, I mean, you could really just make any of the parts you wanted yourself. Whereas other manufacturers, dealers, importers are kind of in a tough spot. They can't really openly discuss pricing and stuff like that, because they could upset their, dealer or their manufacturer and vice versa. We've always tried to be open about this stuff, pricing included. It is part of the name, part of the reason why, it's named Open PPG. If we want affordability and paramotors to improve, then understanding where the costs come from is really important. Ultimately, the antidote to kind of expensive paramotors is the end consumer, you guys, being informed and really seeing where the cost come from. And hopefully I've done a good job here in this video explaining where I think the costs are too high, what methods can be done to bring those costs down, just so as many people can enjoy this sport hobby as possible. Thanks. And let me know if you guys have any other ideas, like, cost-wise, where stuff's too expensive. Feel free to drop in the comments. We'll see you. Thanks. Peace.